and thank you very much for asking me to speak at SnykCon. My name is Jenny Radcliffe, the People Hacker, and my presentation is called How to Be a People Hacker. So when I'm asked what I do for a living, I do tend to say that I'm a hacker. And I think when I say that, people think that I mean I look like this, that I'm a typical hacker from pop culture, which would be somebody who is usually male behind a computer, wearing a hoodie. And not only do I not really use technology, I only really wear a hoodie now and again. And I say I'm not a normal hacker, I'm a people hacker. And I always have to explain a little bit more about exactly what that means and talk to people about what I do. So I suppose the best way to describe it is I've got three main jobs. I do physical infiltration, which is also known as burglary. I do a lot of psychological manipulation, so influence and persuasion skills. When we work with people all the time, we're always dealing with the brain and with persuasion and psychology and influence and negotiation and body language and all those types of things. So they come under that second one. And then ultimately, what those two put together means is that I am essentially a professional con artist. And I think what the next thing that everyone always wants to know is, does that make me a black hat or a white hat hacker, as it were? And I think I'm going to tell you over the course of the next kind of few minutes, really, what I do for a living. And I'm going to let you decide whether I'm a black hat or a white hat. First of all, let me talk about what I do. So a typical day for me, a typical job for me, I spend a lot of time at night sort of wandering around buildings because my clients tend to hire me to break their security, to get past their security. So that's all the fences and the alarms and everything else, as well as through the people, okay, so the security guards, the receptionists, everyone who would stop me getting in and gain unauthorized access to their buildings. And this view here is Canary Wharf in London. Most of these buildings I've been in, I've worked in them, I've done physical penetration tests in these buildings. And it usually starts the same way. It's a client asking me if I can get past their security, and I ignore the front entrance. And I tend to go for the staff entrances because they are less well guarded. So you know that if you go into the front entrance of a large office building or workplace, there's gates and you sign in and you have escorts and everything else. But the staff entrances tend to be less well guarded. There's smoking areas and places where people kind of hang out. And then if I add to it something like a high-vis jacket or a clipboard, I tend to get past quite quickly. And this will be using something called the authority principle. So I would be going in and I'd be looking probably for a staircase. So I tend to avoid elevators because I'm avoiding cameras, and there's cameras and elevators. And I'd usually be avoiding the cameras. And again, not being too technical. I would maybe cover them with blue tack or a post-it note or just hide from them. And I'd wander around and I'd be looking for things that might be of use. So from a security perspective, sort of keys, I might leave USBs. And it's such a cliche to say it, but if we leave thumb drives in and around offices, people plug them in. So if you put malicious payloads on them, you can pretty much guarantee someone's going to plug them in. And in the same way, you know, the message still isn't across about writing down our passwords and that type of thing. So I'll pick up anything of use. I usually make myself a cup of tea because they'll tend to ask me to do that for some reason, and not just because I'm British. And then I'll make my way to an office. And I guess once I'm in offices, you know, I might leave some cards around, business cards, look through all the drawers and the files and see if there's anything I need. And generally speaking, that'll be it, apart from maybe sending an email like this one to the client who was skeptical that I could get in at the target company. You know, you owe me a pint, I've been in the office, see you Monday. And this particular one that I'm kind of thinking of, at that point, everything kind of went wrong. Or not went wrong, but I definitely knew that security was on to me. I could hear stuff going on in the building. And so I made my way to the staircase. And my sort of signature move, or the thing that I do most often, is I go up to the roof as opposed to down and out of the exit. And I tend to sit on the roof, and just let everything pass, let an hour or so go by, let the heat calm down, and then I'll kind of quietly leave the building. And on this particular roof, I was looking out over London, and it was in the days when I still smoked, not anymore. And I was trying to light my cigarette on the roof, and of course it's very windy, and suddenly I heard a click behind me. And there was a guy on the roof, and he offered me a light from a Zippo. And he was a very strange kind of, I can't really, it was one of those things where it was dark and I don't really remember his face, but he was immaculately dressed. And he asked me a question. And he said, Jenny, are you on the side of the angels? And it was so shocking. And I didn't really know what to say. And I kind of paused for breath and inhaled it from my cigarette. And when I looked up, he'd gone. And just to say that this is not atypical for my life. This is the type of thing that happens to me all the time. And I got in my head that maybe he was the devil, right? And then I escaped from the building. I went down. I lived to tell you this story. And so what people always want to know is, how did this all begin? And so I'm going to tell you and see what you think. Basically, I grew up in a city in the northwest of England called Liverpool. It's a beautiful city, but it's had its troubles. It's pretty famous because it's the place where the Beatles were from and where the best soccer team in the world, which is Liverpool Football Club, is from. But that's it. And when I was growing up, the city was pretty much in disarray, and it was 70s, early 80s, and we were just allowed to do what we liked. And I think the moment that I knew that probably my life would be different was when I was playing out in the street, and one of my neighbours locked me in the house and wouldn't let me out the house for a whole day. These days it would be, reported to the police and everything, but back then no one did anything. And although I got out of there physically unharmed, my parents were obviously quite shaken. And then quite quickly after that, I was cornered in an alleyway by a big group of boys from the street, and I had to fight my way out. And I got a soda can and I bent it in half and I slammed it on the head of the biggest boy until I cut all his head open, and it gave me a diversion and I ran away. And at that point, my parents thought we probably should make her a little bit more streetwise. And they thought that the best way to do this was to let me hang out with my cousins for a while. And so, as I say, Liverpool at the time, these are actual photographs from near where I live, from when I'm talking about, was quite run down. And my cousins were older boys, and their idea of fun was to break into empty buildings. And here are just a few of them. Beautiful old buildings, abandoned. Some of them are still abandoned in Liverpool. And they took me along with them. And what happens when you go to those places at such an early age is that you learn very quickly routines of security staff, buildings' weaknesses, entrances and exits. And it wasn't long before I started naming places where I would like to go and break in. Like, for example, this old zoo. I mean, these are the best pictures I could get of a zoo nearby that I wanted to get into. And then we got into a funeral parlor. I thought we wanted to see a body, because kids think that they want to see a body. And then when you do see a body, you're terrified. And so was the case. And then there was like buildings like this one. This was opposite where I lived. This was the best shot. They blew the whole thing up now and demolished it. But I wanted to get in and see what was on the 8th floor, because it was always dark. And by now, the cousins weren't always with me. I mean, by now, and I wouldn't have been a teenager, I was already doing all of this on my own. And so it became kind of a force of habit. We went to music festivals like Glastonbury, and we never paid to get in. We talked our way in, or we climbed over fences. And it became a way of life. I mean, if I needed money, we'd game vending machines, so soda vending machines like this one. There was a code, and it used to just vomit all this change into your hands. I used to deliver packages all over the city until I realized that the packages contained things like drugs and money. And I was just like a kid, and it was easy for me to do it. And I used to run my own little cons, like selling tickets to non-existent events and nightclubs and things. But it never sat well with me because it was illegal and it felt like I was on the wrong side. And so in the end, we started to look at the security for houses of people who had a lot of money near where I lived. And because of the times that tended to be the soccer players. And they asked us if we could break into empty buildings, could we get into their own buildings, their houses, and do the same job, tell them where the weaknesses were, and so that they could put burglar alarms and better locks and fences and things. And so we started to do it. And I wouldn't have been very old. It was when I was at college and before that, even just still at high school. But I managed to get through and do it. And before too long, we were asked to do businesses. And what you find when you start to break into offices and into business places is that it's easier to talk your way in than it is to physically, climb over the roof or to go through back doors. And so I started to talk my way in. And we use all sorts of different pretexts. Maybe we'd be delivering parcels or flowers. And sometimes I go in with the parcel and then I'd be in the building and I go AWOL inside the building. Other times we put microphones and things in the parcels. Sometimes I go in with a medical emergency and I'd say cut myself, and that would bypass all the security while they took me in and cleaned up the cuts. And then again, I'd be sort of loose in the building. We often, and still do at the moment for COVID tests, so now in the COVID times, we use cleaning. So we put these like little yellow kind of tent signs up so no one would disturb us when we were inside a room, or sometimes it was just a cover to be in the building. And I mean, it's endless. Sometimes we were maintenance or security. Sometimes I'd steal uniforms. So we get in, on a Monday and take some uniforms of the catering staff or whatever, and then go back dressed as them later. Or we'd measure up drapes or carpets. Or again, my old favorite, the vending machine, would go in and we'd pretend to be maintenance. And all of these things, we ended up doing it. And I ended up doing it personally all of the time. And eventually, word spread. And I got asked to do things like banks and theme parks, numerous hundreds of offices all over the city, did almost everywhere in the city of Liverpool, which isn't that big a city actually, and ended up getting to London, and then from London to Europe, and then from Europe to the States and the whole world. And it was fun. And I'm just going to show you a few things. And they asked me to tell you some anecdotes, but basically I spent most of my life running around on the tops of buildings, on roofs, climbing fire escapes. You can see in this picture, you can just see my thumb in the top of the picture, because if you are that high up and you are running away from something, you don't take that great shot. You can see it again in the top of this one, where I spent a long time on top of this roof, or this roof, running down the fire escape, shuffling along window ledges to get in on the outside of buildings. You can see how high up I was here. This was just to the first level. And that's what I did. And although it was exhilarating and although it was fun, it was really dangerous, and really, especially when you go outside of the UK, it became a dangerous pastime. And in the end, this is a roof that I was on in Transylvania, and everything was going fine until I fell. And I fell about 4 stories down. And that fence that you can see with the sort of swirly pattern was what stopped me falling onto that concrete floor, where I would have certainly been killed. My phone actually took this photograph whilst I did it. So I didn't take that, my phone did that. I must have had my thumb on the camera. And once that happened, and a few other things happened around about that time that I've told on podcasts and interviews and things, but basically I just felt like I had to stop for a while. And I gave it up and stood back for 2 years. Now, in that 2 years, I did nothing to do with security. I hung up my guns. I decided I wasn't going to do any more, and I stopped answering my phone. And whilst I was away, though, I read up a lot about what we did. And by the time that couple of years went by and I went back to it, it had a name. And the closest thing now to what I actually do for a living is social engineering, I guess. Here's my definition of social engineering, which is the manipulation of human factors to gain unauthorized access to resources and assets for criminal gain and malicious intentions. And I go further to say that it's the active weaponization of human vulnerabilities, behaviors, and errors. Because at the end of the day, that was what we'd always done. Although we were doing the breaking and entering, although we were physically infiltrating buildings, it had always been the people that we'd really had to get past, we'd had to use to get past, right? We'd always used psychology, and we'd always used, as Daniel Kahneman says, a story. People needed a reason, they needed to make decisions, and we were making We were influencing them through these stories. So psychology of the whole thing had always been what we did. And so to give you some examples, there was a factory that asked us to break in, but he told me, the guy, my client said, you'll never do it because we've spent so much money on security. We've spent like 2 million on a perimeter, that the only way that you'll get into my factory is if someone leaves the door open for you, which is, you know, unlikely. But when we looked at the factory and we did some research online, I was looking at the culture and the way people behaved on his site. And they were all about hierarchy and authority. And they always obeyed the rules. And so if we wanted someone to leave a door open on that site, we wrote this on a piece of paper and left it on the door. So you see, we worked with psychology anyway. We worked with manipulation of people. So it was no surprise to me to see that social engineering, although I never used the term for a long time, that social engineering was quite close to what we did. I mean, we'd done things like this. To distract security guards from us getting into a building, we'd have, sometimes it would be one of my crew, and sometimes we'd just pay like a local kid to stand in the line of sight of either the security camera or the security guards and hold up a flare or a smoke bomb. At which point, the security guards would all run to find out what was going on, and we'd get into the building. I mean, I used tricks like to get into the Tower of London. I used embarrassment as my weapon of choice, as it were. So there's the security guards. I'm going in to give a talk, and I need to get past without the guy checking my bag, because in my bag, I'm giving this demonstration. And I have some fake IDs, and I have some lockpicks and a crowbar and smoke bombs and 16 different photographs of me with all different kind of hairstyles. And I can't let him look in my bag as if we were in an airport, because I knew that it'd take an awful lot of explaining. So I got some water and I spilt it on him, and I spilt it on his torso. And then said, oh my God, you know, I'm so sorry, I've got you wet, I'm so stupid. And I started to like sort of tap him down, and it's too close, and it was in his personal space. And he looked at me, and I look innocent, right? I don't look like a hacker. I don't look like I'm dangerous. And he let me through. And now I'm in the Tower of London with my full kit. So we'd always used this site. We'd used emotions for years. And to give you an idea of the type of thing, they always talk in security about not using fear. But fear works, right? And I know there's good reasons to use other emotions, and we do. But for example, we used locusts to empty a room. And I say fear, panic is probably a better word. But you can buy these things because people have reptiles as pets and they need live bait. So we just went into a shop, we bought some locusts, and we let them go in a conference because we needed to get to the phone of the keynote. And while she was up, she had it in her bag, and everybody ran, and she ran, and we backdoored the phone. And can I just say again, at the request of the client. So we'd used emotions like fear. We'd used sadness and sympathy and empathy, which is used. And by now, I'm starting to use phishing emails. Right? By now, we don't even need to break in because it can all be done remotely using emails. But we sent one company in the States an email saying, you know, the bar that you all go to every Friday for beers that's owned by Joe is about to close down. Joe he's fine, but he's not so well, and he's about to retire very suddenly. And if you guys would like to contribute to a gift for him, here's the link. And of course, everybody clicked on the link, and it was fake. And they all ran to the bar on the Friday to say goodbye to Joe, who was in on the joke. And the con, but we reimbursed all of them and bought them all a drink. And then I gave a talk in the bar about why they shouldn't have clicked on that link. So it was all about manipulation. It was always about psychology. I mean, we told people that the Wi-Fi was going to be switched off and that they had 5 minutes to back up their material, and then gave them a number to ring. And anger takes over at that point. I got into one company physically by telling them that we were going to have either a support dog or a support cat in the building, and which one did they want? And could they show me where they thought the cat or dog should be allowed to go? And I kid you not, I had numerous people switching off alarms, holding doors open for me, show me where their little support animal could go. We used flattery and promised rewards to let us in. And the angriest I've ever seen anyone was when we told a whole company that we were about to replace the caffeine with decaffeinated coffee. So all of the coffee in the whole building was now going to be decaf. And right, it's death before decaf for some of us, because caffeine was evil and was causing all these troubles. And if they had a problem with that, could they click on the link and let us know why? And of course, everyone clicks on the link and everybody lets us through. So we'd always been sneaky, as it were, excusing the pun. But up until this point, I'd always had to, or up until a certain point, I'd always had to physically survey the building. I'd always have to go and watch people come and go to Joe's bar and listen to the conversations in order to work out which of these things would work for that company and for those people. So, you know, were these the ones that are going to fall for the support dog, or is it going to be the reward or whatever? But then social media lands. And when social media lands, suddenly I don't have to be this amazing, you know, detective and do all this surveillance, because everything I need to know about everyone is online. I mean, I was amazed when I first saw it, and it reminded me of when I was in Africa. And I had a guide on this safari that we went on, and he was telling me about ostriches. And he told me that they had these 3 ostrich chicks that they found when they were very young in the wilderness, and that they'd taken them and raised them on their site to put them back in the wild, right? And they'd spend 3 years bringing them to maturity, training them, looking after them, making very sure at massive expense and time that these things were able to look after themselves. But then the minute that they let them out into the wilderness, within, I think, 20 minutes, they'd walked up to a pride of lions to say hello. And I asked him with some optimism, hoping for some optimistic answer, and what happened? And he said, well, the lions ripped them to pieces immediately. And that's how I felt when I saw social media. You know, Zuckerberg said it. It isn't a question of what big tech wants to know about people. It's what people want to tell us about themselves that really counts. And people tell us everything. So for me to be a people hacker was very easy. All of a sudden, it was a very easy thing to do. But I felt as if I couldn't do it for much longer. I felt that the physical side of things, I was getting too old and too fat to do it, really. It's a young person's game. It's very physically exhausting. But also, did you really need me anymore? Did the world really need me anymore if everything was online? But the truth is, this isn't the time to retire. 95% of those security breaches, depending on who you go to, are due to human error or manipulation, right? So that means that almost everything, all of the security alerts, all the privacy leaks and the data breaches, every phishing email, every text that you get that's fake and that's criminal, you know, the approaches that people get over social media, even, you know, basic phone calls that sometimes go to our grandparents, to seniors and elders and catch them out, the scam calls, even, yes, still the physical infiltrations, all come down fundamentally to someone like me, to someone who was manipulating the people, to a social engineer, or you could say to a people hacker. So why is all this relevant to you? Well, firstly, they wanted a good story, right? And so we all like the stories. Like I said before, as Kahneman said, people need a story to act and to emote about something, to feel something. But also because the theme of SneakCon this year is to build securely. And I want you to know a quote of mine that I've said for many years, which is this: whenever someone is building a wall, someone else is working on the ladder. And you lot build walls, you know, you build things, you are creative. So you have to build with this in mind. Remember that if you are interacting with people, then people can be hacked. And that's just a fact. Okay. What I'd say is, I don't like to call myself either a white hat or a black hat. I don't actually think that anyone is really a white hat or a black hat. I think we're all kind of somewhere in the middle. We're sort of human. We're the people, right? And if we're the people, then Terry Pratchett said it best. The humans are at the place where the fallen angels meet the rising apes. Human. And that is going to be our downfall. But it's also our one shot at salvation. So, where there is people, there is a people hacker. And I remember that question, am I on the side of the angels? And I want you to ask yourself that question because it's time to pick a side. My answer is this. Probably. I want to say thank you for listening to me talk. I've been the People Hacker. Goodbye.